his mom goes, that girl's not really wearing a shirt. Wasn't it cold in Kentucky? And he goes, I don't know, she might be a stripper or something. And then it turns out I am a stripper from Canada.
Ready for this epic intro I prepared?
I want to throw up, but yeah.
All right, well, first off, let me say thanks everyone for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. Let me introduce the queen of Canadian hardcore, the maniac laugh artist, and that tattooed titty metal, Metallica metal stripper we all know and love. Nikki, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh my God. Okay, yeah, you won that one. Thanks.
Yeah, I fucked it up on the recording, but it was supposed to say that Metallica, or that tattooed titty Metallica metal stripper, and I love that. That's a tongue twister for sure.
Oh God, that's so much. I'm impressed that you could even say that because I wouldn't be able to.
Yeah. And I also hit up Jessa just before we did this. I'm like, what's the most like metal hardcore song that Nikki has danced to? And she was like, either Metallica or Disturbed, but I like the alliteration of Metallica over Disturbed.
I've also danced to Power Trip, so
okay. Yeah,
that's like pretty metal and not.
I guess I didn't
rock.
say thrash, but yeah, like I guess we're
that's
picking
valid.
our battles. But anyways, yeah. I'm super excited for this podcast today. We're going to talk about sex work and some of the behind the scenes behind that, talk about a lot of the other things as far as like hardcore is involved. I'm really excited to do this. I know you did a podcast just a week or so as the time of recording this, and I know that you were like, oh, I'm taking, or that person took your podcast virginity, so to speak. But I was thinking about it as, you know, they went to first base with you on that podcast, but we're doing video and audio. So this is like second base, so to speak.
You know what? So you're still taking a virginity of mine, and I'm okay with that too.
That's fair because it's the video format as well. Sweet. Well, you know, I gave you a pretty elaborate intro, but, you know, can you just kind of say your name and how you would be best known, I guess, in hardcore before we kind of jump into it?
Well, my name's Nikki. How would I best be known in hardcore? Being the tiny spitball that just shows up in random cities and moshes.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how else to describe it. I just randomly show up, say hi to people, go to a show, go home.
Yeah.
And nobody knows how I end up in places. That's it.
Yeah. And I'm surprised you didn't say that girl in that Hands of God LDB clip, but
no. I have a really funny story to tell you about that. After.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. But you know, you've seen a number of the podcasts on the show, and you know how much I really value just context as far as how people got into heavier music, hardcore overall. So can you kind of take us back in time, tell me some of the moments where that steered you in that direction to listen and be down with the riffs, as you said?
I was really trying to think about this. And then I realized I had to admit this. The first time I listened to hardcore and like new metal and shit was after I watched Triple X, the movie. And I thought the music was so fucking cool that I went and bought the CD from, was it HMV or whatever that used to exist?
Right.
I went and got the soundtrack, and it had like Rammstein on it, and I think it had Puddle of Mud, and I think it had Hatebreed. And I remember the intro of that movie was Rammstein playing, and I was like, this is so sick. And I was like maybe like 10 or 11 years old, and that was my first kind of like intro to hardcore and like metal and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't really get into it till I was like probably like 13, and was hitting the emo phase that we all know and love.
Yeah.
And
the phase of all the photos that we've deleted off our Facebooks and whatnot.
Yes. And so what ended up happening is when Nexopia was really big, you obviously used Nexopia.
I didn't actually. I wasn't that deep into it.
Okay, so a boy that I had a crush on posted "As I Lay Dying" lyrics, and I was like, okay, I gotta check this shit out. And then I was like, okay, I could be into that, and forced myself to listen to it because it was something new.
Right.
And I'm not like, I don't know a bunch about music. I'm not a musician. Like, I don't know shit. So I was just like, I listened to it, and then that got me into like Lamb of God, and of course I was into a bunch of random other shit. But I come from the era of like you used LimeWire to download things. So unless you knew the album name, you just had to randomly like pick songs and hope that it was something cool.
Yeah.
And not porn. I was pretty good at that. But that kind of really got me more into that metal emo phase. And then I was hitting that up until probably I started getting into, like Protest the Hero, Alexis on Fire, The Devil Wears Prada. And I was like 14, 15, 16. And then it was like, I ended up, I would say my first really like hardcore experiences. Like I went to a couple random shows in the city, but it was Have Heart's last show in Calgary.
Oh,
so
okay.
I think I was 16 going into I had been going to local shows, like a lot of metalcore, some hardcore here, but I didn't really understand it. And it was Have Heart's last show here. And I remember going, I want to go to this because I don't want to look back when I get older and think I was an idiot for not being able to go to this show, even though I wasn't really into them at the time.
Yeah.
And 27-year-old me really fucking thanks my 16-year-old self for that one.
100,000%. Yeah.
So I went, and it was just like one of the craziest experiences I've ever had. And I had already started to go to local shows, but it just kept me going to those shows and then starting to learn more. And I worked at Detox actually when I was like 17, 18, which was like, I don't know if you ever had Detox, but it was like the Canadian version of Hot Topic.
Oh, okay.
So I really got to embrace like listening to like metalcore, because I really came from metalcore, and I'm never going to deny that. And it slowly just kind of transitioned into hardcore, getting into Terror, getting into Trapped Under Ice, who's one of my favorite bands. And then you start listening to more and more and more, but I didn't really start to like define my taste till I was like 17, 18, 19, and had more of a grasp on how to look for music. Or I just dated dudes who knew how to look for music, and I just make them show me shit.
Yeah. No, the shout out to LimeWire, where you were just downloading specific songs. Like I value listening to full albums front to back now more than ever, because that was me. Because it was like I would like, there's even times like in the last few years where I've like gone back to listen to like what's a band I can say without being too posery. Like I was into like, I played a lot of Halo growing up. And so like Halo 2, there was like a number of different bands that were like making music for the soundtrack. So like bands like Breaking Benjamin is like the first one that comes to mind. And so I only had like maybe like 4 or 5 songs by them, but like eventually like went back maybe like a couple of years ago and listened to that full album. Like, I understand how things flow together. Also downloading songs, like you said, and there's like bleeps in the middle of it, and just in your brain is like, that's how the song goes. So,
and it wasn't at all like that.
No, not at all. Yeah. So, and I'm always, it is always really cool to hear the different, I guess, like first bands, but a big thing that I've seen is like video games, movies, like certain things that have a soundtrack that kind of have a harder hitting edge versus just like, pop music or top 40 stuff. That's really cool for sure. Yeah,
that Rammstein song really just fucked me up.
Yeah. In a good way for sure.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a good kind of like laying the groundwork as far as you go, and like, as far like I've lived in Calgary for coming up on 3 years now, and like I would come here for the fest prior to living here, and a couple shows, and always kind of knew who you were through the grapevine. And something that was always interesting to me was like I can't remember, I think it was when I was living here, but there was a show, it was at Commons, and you were like, oh yeah, I'm just here to see like so-and-so touring band, like I have to go back to work, and like I have a show or stuff like that. And there was multiple times where that was happening, so it kind of got me like more interested of like, the sex work that you're doing. And I know that's kind of like you said on the past podcast, that's kind of like an umbrella term, but like the main thing as far as the terminology you go by is like a stripper.
I'm a stripper through and through.
Yeah, right. So
through and through.
So obviously I'm kind of interested in that process of like how that was introduced into your life. And I think it would be cool if we can kind of talk about, the more of the business side of things, because on the podcast that you did, it was really cool because I think like naturally like people that think about sex work and things like that think of these people as being these like horny animals who like can't like just want to like only talk about that all the time. And knowing you, it's like you've made certain jokes that's like definitely related to that, but like not like I know you well enough that that's not just like the only thing that you're interested in and whatnot. So first let's before we get too off the tracks here, can you kind of just give me the story of like how you got introduced to that, what gravitated you towards that, and how you started at least experimenting that, I guess.
So I've actually wanted to be a stripper since I was, and I hate admitting this, but like I've wanted to be a stripper since I was like 14. My handle on Exopedia used to be stripper dot. Straight up.
Wow.
But I honestly was just scared. Like I didn't know where to start. I didn't know anything about the industry. And then when so I lived in Saskatoon for a couple of years. And then when I moved back, I was really starting to think about it. But there still was so much stigma affiliated with sex workers and stripping, especially in the hardcore community. Like there was still a lot of like very much prudeness that existed. And I just was like, do I want to deal with the ridicule that I'm going to get? Because I already dealt with a lot of ridicule being as sexually open as I have been my whole life.
Sure.
And that's like a whole, if you want to talk about like my whole life, we could start at such a young age with that kind of shit. But I just like wasn't ready. And then, so years went by and people were like, well, why don't you? And I just like never got the guts to go into the club and like apply basically. And then I was working at a clothing store and a girlfriend of mine came in, and it's a girl that I literally known my whole life. Like our moms worked together. She knew me when I was in the womb and tried to name me. Like that's how long I've known this girl.
Yeah. Womb and to the tomb, I think you said.
Yes, yeah. Womb to the tomb.
Yeah.
So she had known me my whole life, and she came in and was like, we were talking, and I was saying how minimum wage had gone up here, but they didn't raise any of the managers' wages, and I was a manager, and I was like, I'm making $1 more than my fucking sales associate who doesn't have to do shit.
Right.
And I was just upset. And she goes, well, like, I'm working at this club, blah, blah, blah. Why don't we meet for coffee? And I was like, you know what? Okay. So I met with her, and I thought I was going to go dance, which is like a dancer that doesn't get naked. They just like are in bra and underwear and dance around like for tables. And she goes, okay, so we don't have any of those positions at the club, I know. But we have what's called a house girl. And it's basically, she goes, it's a stripper. You don't go on stage, but you do the VIP dances, blah, blah, blah. And I went, okay. So I was really lucky. I got to sit and ask her a lot of questions and have a full discussion with her. And I said, you know what, fuck it. I'll go apply. And I was like, worst case, like, I do this. I don't like it. I'm not stuck. So I went in one night and applied, and the manager was super nice. He was really great. He's like, oh yeah, Alaska told me about you, blah, blah, blah. So he's like, well, if you want to work for us, I need this information. So I sent him like half that information. And then I was like, fuck, I need to come up with a stage name. And at the time I was with my ex, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I can't think of a stage name. And he actually came up with my stage name, which was super cool. Thus me being Karamata. And that is my stage name and has been for the last 2.5 years.
Can you tell me if that means anything specifically? Because I Googled it and it came up as like something Serbian.
So
yeah,
no.
Can you clarify that?
So Kara came from my favorite superhero, Kara Zor-El, Supergirl.
Okay.
And Mata's my ex-fiance's last name. Like, That's it. So I came up with that. And even when we broke up, I was just like, this has already been my stage name at the time for like 6 months to a year or something like that. And I was like, I'm not changing it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't bother me because I have no ill will like towards him. So I don't think anything of it.
Yeah.
And I also don't have to worry that anybody else has the same name as me.
Right.
Because there's like a lot of girls that end up having the same names as each other with just like different spelling. And I am just like the one and only Karamata that exists.
Yeah.
So
no different than
cool.
bands naming themselves the same, but they're on like opposite sides of the world.
Yeah. So I kind of just kept going with it and built a brand around that, which there comes the tattooed metal titty stripper me. Yeah. So that's how that came to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was something you mentioned, and like there might be a couple times that I referenced that podcast because like you kind of shared a lot of kind of some of the stuff behind the scenes, and obviously used that as a bit of research for this one. But you mentioned that your work was talking about like branding, and like obviously like I'm into marketing and branding and whatnot, so like obviously like those are buzzwords where I naturally gravitate towards. So obviously, like most people like I'm kind of surprised nowadays when I see someone at a hardcore show who doesn't have at least one tattoo. So like that's a pretty normal thing in that scene. But you were mentioning that some clubs like they have a certain like I guess ideal of like the girls that work there. So some are just like tattooless. So obviously like that's not an issue at your work, but talk to me about that thought process of like, like I can kind of like bring in some of the things that I'm doing at these hardcore shows and apply it to my job, essentially.
It's like you said, like I'm not the only one with tattoos, but I'm one of the only ones that looks the way I do.
Yeah.
There are like, especially having traditional style tattoos. A lot of girls have black and gray work or realistic, or I don't even know all the different styles, but I get so many compliments on my tattoos because a lot of people, like I end up working in a lot of shithole small towns and they don't have they don't have the tattoo artists there that we have.
Interesting.
And so like I remember being in I was in Chetwynd, BC. It is 10 hours away from here. It is a town of 2,500. And like it takes me 5 minutes to get from one side of town to the next. That's how small this place is.
Wow. Okay.
And I was working up there and I remember a guy like complimenting like my tattoos, and he's like, oh, I got this one done in town. And it was this shitty, like black and gray work that I would never get done. Personal opinion, never get done. Right. But I was like, oh, sick, man. He's like, yeah, I got it done in town here. And in my head, I want to be like, I can fucking tell. Just like based on the quality. Sorry, but I was like, oh man, that's sick. But it's even like going into these spots like that and they see me and they're like, holy shit. Like it starts spreading around town that there's a hot stripper in town.
Interesting.
Like, because they get so many different girls that come through but very few end up looking like me. The closest I'd say that looks like me is my friend Cruella, who is covered head to toe in fucking tattoos and has a lot of the similar style that I do, like the traditional. She's very, very, very cool, but she has like head to toe tattoos. But she's the closest thing that, in my opinion, that like looks similar to the way I do. That is like more the traditional style, edgier style. But then again, she doesn't dance to metal or have that vibe.
Yeah. So like a lot of these things now, I think the more that you get to know a person is like you can kind of start piecing some things together. So, like I was kind of floored with when I was first becoming friends with you. I'm like, Nikki's like traveling like for long periods of time all the time. But now it makes a little bit more sense. And maybe you can just like clarify things if I'm just assuming something. But when you're traveling, you're also kind of still working at the same time. On a freelance basis, is that kind of
No. So the way it works now with the agency I work for is they do bookings all across Western Canada.
Okay.
So they book for a lot of the small towns that the clubs are not big enough, the towns are not big enough to have strippers, like the same strippers there all the time, because nobody would come in. So what they do is they rotate different girls every single week. so that there's new faces, fresh faces, so it keeps the bars alive and it keeps those strip clubs alive. Because if they saw the same girls all the time, nobody would keep. It's not the same as Calgary, where we have so many different fucking people here coming through all the time, and there's so many different girls because it's so big. I'm in towns that most of the time the population is 100,000 and under.
Right.
So most of the time, actually, they're like, there's like 100,000 and under is the population of the towns that I'm in. So I'm in places like Vernon, BC. I'm in Kamloops, Chetwynd. I'm in Red Deer. I'm in Rocky Mountain House. I'm in, where else have I been? Redcliffe, which is the town right beside Medicine Hat. So I'm in all the, Brandon, Manitoba.
Yeah.
Love Brandon. Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But I'm in like all these small little towns. So I just get booked every week in a different place depending on like where I want to go. Like I call into my agency and I'm like, hey, what bookings do you have? And they'll tell me what towns. I'll be like, I'll go there. I'll go there.
Gotcha.
I'll go there.
Yeah.
It's kind of how it works.
So yeah, freelancing maybe was the incorrect term. The right one is like you're under an agency and they're feeding you like gigs essentially.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And that's, it's kind of, I guess like that's the smart move because the town's not big enough. Usually, it's no different in a hardcore band where it's like, okay, like maybe there's not enough interest for people who are making bands, but technically speaking, you can still bring bands to towns.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very cool. I want to go back a little bit. You mentioned kind of before on how, when you started, at least, trying to explore, the idea of doing sex work or stripping in general, on how that wasn't a popular thing in the hardcore community, at least at the time. So can you talk to me a little bit about that? I think I'm kind of curious if it's like a double minority kind of thing where it's like stripping and being a girl in hardcore, at least at the time. But can you just talk to me like how you overcame those, I guess, judgments?
So and that's why it took me so long to start dancing. So you have to think I started dancing at 25. But the reason it took me so long was because I was so worried about what people thought. Because for years, people would shit talk girls who were just down to fuck. Like that's the easiest and best way that I can put it is like, I've seen members of predominant bands make tweets about how, everybody just goes to a fest to fuck and that's gross, like shit like that. Or people that, and it's happened to me, and this is going to be like really personal, but people would sleep with me and then act like they never did. Or it was, you slept with Nikki, but you were quiet about it for a long time because I was a local slut, like through and through. I was down to fuck. I thought that shit was cool. Didn't bother me. I had a good time as long as the other person was also down. That's all that mattered to me. Right. And I think there was a lot of prudiness that existed and a lot of both men and women that just weren't ready to explore their sexuality or explore that openness because we're raised in a society that was like, you only have sex in a relationship, let alone if you're like me and raised Catholic, you only have sex when you're married.
Right.
When it's not at all like that. And you can be free and have sex with whoever you want as long as it's consensual and both parties are wanting to do that. You know what I mean? So I really struggled for a long time with being slut shamed and all that kind of stuff and really having to work through that. And this isn't a, woe is me shit, but it's just like that. Like I used to get anonymous messages on Tumblr, like as late as 2015, 2016 with people telling me that I was what was wrong with hardcore. Oh. Me being open was what was wrong with hardcore. And I just remember thinking like, you had to anonymously message me this shit.
Right. You
couldn't say it to my fucking face and have a discussion with me.
Right.
And at that point, I was just like, I really don't fucking care anymore. Like, as long as I'm not hurting anybody, I'm like talking to people and like consent's a big thing. Like, I don't fucking care. And I just literally threw everybody else's opinion out the fucking window other than like, obviously people I care about. But even the people I cared about just was like, oh, that's Nikki. That's what she does.
Yeah.
And I just stopped fucking giving a shit what people said and like exuded this new confidence of just fuck you.
Yeah.
That's the best way to put it.
Yeah. And it's like, I appreciate you being like open about that because I'm sure like there might be a couple girls or, whoever who's listening who have had a similar experience where someone is judging them off of just them being different. And like the thing that I personally love about hardcore is that like we are all these oddities that all just love this like weird, subgenres, whether it's metalcore or hardcore adjacent shit. And, the fact that, someone is so broken in themselves to like write an anonymous message to try and bring someone else down is like, obviously you are not what's wrong with hardcore. It's those people who are like not working out those things for themselves, for sure.
It just like, I'm really happy that hardcore is in a place now where we're all just fucking freaks and we're a lot more open sexually. And that whole mentality of like slut shaming has really gone out the window. I mean, it still is going to exist. Don't get me wrong. But I would say the majority speaking, a lot of people are a lot more open because they realize like, who fucking cares? Like, who cares at the end of the day, like what you're doing in the bedroom, as long as it's consensual, you know what I mean? Like that's really all that matters. And like, please don't try to ruin people's relationships. Like that's the only other thing I could say.
Yeah. And just like the overall notion of just like, like being like just more empathetic of like, hey, I don't know enough about this kind of lifestyle or like this, religion or whatever it is, like being like, those conversations that maybe you had with people that introduced you to this, like that's what I hope with this podcast is like to open some people's eyes a little bit of like, try and, get to see where someone's coming from before you just like make a big Twitter battle about it. So one of the questions I have, like obviously like hardcore is like big part of your life and like you're wanting to blend that. We were mentioning at the beginning of the podcast that you're you've danced to like some older Metallica stuff, some Disturbed, some Power Trip. What's like an ideal, like I don't know how long like a dance, like how many songs that is, but like what's like maybe a perfect Karamata 3-song playlist, so to speak?
I have like 20 that I could give you, honestly, because I have a whole bunch of different sets based on what my costume is, whether it's a full show, a half show. Sure. So full show for me is 18 minutes, which is about 5 songs.
Okay.
Half show is 3 songs. And I dance to a variety of stuff. I dance to Static X, Cold Chamber, Limp Bizkit, Metallica, Korn. And then I throw in hardcore just for fun, just for shits and giggles. So I dance to Higher Power. I dance to Absence of Mind. I dance to No Warning. I dance to Power Trip just because it's fun to get away with.
Right.
So
has anyone in the club ever come up to you and be like, hey, what is that song with that like like that one riff?
When I dance to No Warning and Power Trip, actually I get that the most. People are like, what is that? That's super sick. And I'm like, oh, it's this band called Power Trip. They're from Texas. They're really fucking cool. You should listen to them.
That's so
cool. I've had people say the same thing about like No Warning when I dance to them. Because I dance to Hell Realm. So I'll find, and I just like put something up on Instagram the other day. That's how I became friends with some of the dudes from No Warning, is stripping to their music. But I find I always listen for like rhythms and beats that I'm like, that I almost like call it like a crossover with like hardcore and stripping, because there's like bouncy parts that I'll hear that I'm like, oh, I could do this bull trick to that. And that's why I really like Higher Power as well. That's why I really like New Absence of Mind. I put them on and I dance to them all the time because they're very like Alice in Chain vibes that I'm like, this is sick.
Yeah.
I like this. And that's become part of like my routine, is actually to dance to their music.
Yeah. Yeah. That guy that you did that podcast with, he was like, I don't know how you can dance to Disturbed and Metallica. I'm like, dude, like seeing Nikki like mosh to Sad But True at one of the last Endgame shows, like, I don't know. There is a bouncy nature, and like I think if you've been in hardcore enough, like you just hear a part, and naturally your mind thinks of like, oh, like this is a 2-step. This is like a time to punch everybody in the face moment. So,
well, and I think of like perfect is like Absence of Mind. There's in their new album, there's some songs where there's bouncy parts that I'll just like drop into the splits and then bounce my butt up and down because it's like one of those dun, 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 like something that's just like bouncy like that. And I just was like, how can I make this slutty? Mm-hmm. And then so I did that, and it just like, same with like Power Trip and No Warning. Like I just hear these like rhythms and I'm like, I can make this rhythm slutty. I'm also going to be adding Drain into the stuff I dance to now too.
Yeah, I saw a tease of that on your Instagram, and I fully back that band to be in your rotation. Mm-hmm. You know, something that I heard that you said as well that was really interesting is like, people's experience at a club is like super, or their first experience, sorry.
Yes.
And when you were talking about that, like it really, you know, rang true for like hardcore as well. Cause like some people can have like a first hardcore, you know, show experience, and, you know, whether that's a broken nose or, you know, someone is, you know, rude to them or whatever it is. But yeah. Can you just kind of talk about like why you think and how you, cause the thing with like, either like you're at work, you know, you're not the only girl there. There's other girls, there's other staff. Same thing at a hardcore show. It's like, you can't just be the only one to kind of dictate how things happen. So how do you, I guess, do your part at both work and at a show?
So unfortunately in the strip club, it is kind of a every girl for herself situation. Sure. So I just do what I can because I just focus on my bag and making my bread. So that's why I tell other girls what I do, but if they choose not to do it, I can't force them to. Right. Whereas at a hardcore show, we want more kids coming out to shows. We want more young kids to be there. So that's when I kind of like, Jess is actually way better at it than I am, like way better at like meeting the young kids, saying hi. I'm just like off in La La Land most of the time, just like, I'm just so excited to be here. Oh my God. Like I'm fucking 17 every time I go to a show. Right. So I just think it's important. I just try to make sure that everybody does feel welcome. And like, I've started a thing when I'm running doors at Jess and I shows now, I will be saying thank you to every single person that comes in that door. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you being here. Cause something as simple as that could have a kid come back again. Or like, if I get a chance to, I'm going to try and start asking kids how they enjoyed the show. Like at the end of it, be like, hey, did you guys have a good time? Like, and maybe like almost try to get feedback because nobody fucking did that for me. Nobody cared if I came back. And I was just lucky that I was like, oh, I get a reason to beat up people and no one gets mad at me. Cool. I'm going to come back. I have a lot of anger that I want to deal with. Right. But that's not everybody else. Like, cause everybody else comes for different reasons, obviously. But I just, if someone had said, hey, thank you so much for coming to this show. Like, how did you enjoy it? I probably would have felt welcome a lot faster. Yeah. So I just want to start doing that because I'm like, in 10 years, I'll probably still be running shows and shit, but I don't know if it's going to be here in Calgary or if I'm going to live somewhere else or what. Yeah. I want the scene here to still continue and thrive. And I want those younger kids that are like, oh, I remember when I first met Nikki, she asked me she thanked me for coming to this show. And like ask me if I enjoyed myself, or like, as lame as it sounds, like I'll fucking tell a cute little girl when she moshes that I love her mosh and that I think it's sick. Right. Because there needs to be more of that. And like, people are like, oh, that's tacky. I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Have you met me? Like, I'm tacky as hell. Like,
yeah. And like, I thought about this today as far as like, you know, what are all the things that you can do? Cause like, I think for you or I, or for a lot of people who are listening, like, hardcore is so in our DNA that it's not a question when there's like something local that's happening. You know, it's and obviously when like bigger shows or like festivals happen, like it's in our DNA, like trying to figure out like, okay, how can I, you know, fly out to this fest or whatever it is. Yep. But, you know, as far as, you know, trying to think about the next generation and like trying to bring in new kids and like to really have kids like hooked as far as like, you know, coming to shows and being active and starting new bands, because like that is so key. And like I see the spark of that like now living in Calgary, because in Winnipeg there was like no all ages shows, like it was like an 18 plus crowd, and to see like bands like Set Straight and like Bitter and all these like younger kids like doing shit is like so inspiring to me.
Set Straight, when I got to see them on that matinee that Jess and I put on, they started playing and I whipped around to Jess and I was just like,
yeah.
I stood on a chair and just threw my hands in the air like this and was like, yes, 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 this is exactly what we fucking need, because I was so fucking excited. And I will ride for those boys. I will put them on every goddamn show that I possibly can, because that's what I want to see.
Yeah.
They're so nice. They're so easy to work with. They're so just, they're little bundles of joy. I love them.
Yeah.
I love them.
Mad shout out to the Set Straight boys. And, they're working on some stuff. So unfortunately, you can't listen to it as far as, well, who knows? By the time this comes out, maybe they have a demo. Maybe they're working on it. But Set Straight, check it out. I think they're on Instagram. But anyways, what I was trying to get to was, there's always things that, like, I guess, like, no one in hardcore is perfect, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Is like,
no.
We always fall short of like, oh, I could have talked to that like dude who was just chilling out in the corner, or I could have like given that hug to that person that could have came to that show. But there's, especially when you're either running a show or filming a show or playing a show, like there's lots of bouncing around to different people, which can at times be like a little disingenuous, but like it's hard not to do that, especially when there's so many people being like, yo, how's it going? And then you're like, yeah, thanks. Okay, I gotta go do this. So yeah, it's a challenge for sure.
That's why I thought running the front door would be great, and I could just say thank you as everybody walked in.
Yeah, you're kind of in one spot, which is nice. So to transition kind of back to the sex work stuff, we were talking about the importance of a first visit. So like maybe you can talk about all that stuff that we just discussed, but as far as your job is concerned, because I totally agree that like, creating a culture and a place to be and educating people as far as like, maybe like this isn't the Push Moss show, like, but like talk to me about like a little bit about how you kind of like, what's kind of like what's an ideal proper introduction that you try to give to people if it's like their first time at a strip club?
Is really just like a run through of etiquette and how the strip club works. I find a lot of, now don't get me wrong, there are a lot of shitheads that come into the strip club, like a lot. So this isn't every time every young kid or every person's first time in the strip club is good, because there's also a lot of people who have like preconceived notions of what things should be like.
Sure.
But I'm talking about like an ideal situation. It's a really nice young group of boys who've just never been before, that walk in and are really engaging in conversation. I will like tell them, I'll be like, well, do you know how the strip club works? And if they go, no, I'll be like, okay, so here's the deal. So you have this girl here. This is what she does. This is how you can pay her, or this is what you can do. You have these girls here. This is what they do. This is how you can pay them. If you want to get a dance, you can take us to the back. This is what happens back there. This is like, you pick however much time. We usually recommend you do this. Like, and I just give them a very basic rundown. I don't go into too much details because it's like, it's an overstimulating experience the first time you come into a strip club.
For sure.
There is so much to look at. There are so many half naked and naked girls running around. There's servers in hot ass clothes. There's loud music. There's lights. There's lots of people. Sometimes the club's dead, but can't win them all. Yeah. But because of that, there's so much going on that I try to give them a very basic rundown, but the important stuff that will stick in their brain. And I let them ask questions. I'm like, don't hesitate to ask questions, or if you're not sure, ask a girl.
Yeah.
And now that's not to say every girl is going to be as nice as I am. I know a lot of girls that just do not like the fucking 18-year-olds because they're not big spenders. One of my best customers though that I've ever had was an 18-year-old. Ever. And like, you just never know who you're going to meet. You never know what their money situation is like, what their job is like. You don't know if they have an inheritance, if they've just been saving, if like anything like that. So I don't judge an 18-year-old based on like how he looks.
Right.
Because I found one of my best customers by not judging him and saying no. And he told me he wasn't gonna, what actually happened is he was 18, I sat down, I started talking to him just on a whim, and he like, we got along really well. And he's like, well, I'm not going to buy a dance. And I was like, I got nothing really going on, so I'll sit and chat. So he tipped me. And I was like, cool, I'll stay and chat. And then he goes, you know what? Changed my mind. I'll go for a dance. And I was like, okay, cool. So we go for a dance, has a great time. And I was like, sick, I just got a dance. Love it. And he goes, after my stage show, he goes, I want to go for 2 more. And I was like, okay, tight. Like, I'm not going to say no. And then he goes, what do you work? Like, I want to come in and spend this kind of money. And I was just like, okay. I work this day at this club. Here's my Instagram. And we actually created a really good relationship. And he came back, and this kid just happened to have an inheritance that he got and spent lots of money. But it's because I took those 5 extra minutes to sit down and talk to him and create a relationship. And I freaking adore him. Like, I haven't talked to him in a while, but reminds me, I think he got a girlfriend is why. So I'm like, don't want to cross boundaries. But like, I would check in and see how he was doing.
Sure.
All the time.
Yeah.
So I like, because I created that good experience for him, he wanted to come back.
Yeah.
He wanted to bring his friends. So I try to do stuff like that and explain how everything works so that, you know, even if they don't come back to me necessarily, they know what to do so they don't get yelled at, so that they don't have some girl be a bitch to them or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could still happen, but overall, I'm just like, I just think about me with a restaurant based on my service. If I have a really good first experience, I'm more likely to go back.
Yeah. No, and I think like those little moments are like, those are the moments that people actually remember. It's not like, oh, this huge band was happening. It's like remembering key like acts of kindness or just like genuine, you know, just being genuine with people on like a one-to-one basis, like can really like, you know, because you could have easily just been like, okay, or just like walk by and then like, you know, we wouldn't be having that conversation or anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I even think like in hardcore with that too, I think about one of the first Rainfests I went to. I love Weekend Nachos. And the vocalist, I bought merch from him and he kept saying hi to me the whole weekend every time you see me. And that like stuck with me. And that was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me to this day because it was just such a small gesture, but it was so nice. And I was like, that's so cool. Mm-hmm. Like I can still picture him just like saying hi to me all the fucking time. And I thought it was the greatest thing at 19. I was like, it was one of my favorite bands of saying hi to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's always like, you know, hardcore was one of the first things that like kind of introduced me to the idea that like, you know, these big rock stars that I've looked up to are just, you know, humans at the end of the day. And so like, and you can go up to be like, hey, like, I just want to say like, I like this. And they're like, yo, like it's crazy, especially with this podcast, just the not easiness, but the ability that we're able to hit up different people. And then like we chat, like, you know, we're of the same level versus like, you know, having to talk to a publicist or anything crazy like that.
That's my opinion on that.
Yeah. You know, like something that I wanted to ask as far as like, you know, you've said, and I've seen you like kind of express the idea that like not it's not like not everybody should be at a strip club, but there are certain people who shouldn't be at one. Can you talk about like just like some of the your things where you're racking your brain, like how did you think that you could just walk in here and not at least understand a bit of like what goes on around here?
It's the entitlement. So not to do a bunch of unpacking, but there isn't a lot of entitlement with men that think, and I'm going to put it super crudely, that women and their pussies should be at their disposal for them for free. And that is a huge, huge issue that like only simps and incels and all that kind of shit are the ones that pay for it. No, that whole mentality and that whole idea of not paying for pussy and not that you're too good for it is fucking bullshit. Like I would way rather personally go into a strip club, pay to look at a girl naked, know exactly what the fuck I'm getting, and then go home rather than go out on a date with a girl, buy dinner, buy drinks, buy dessert, and then maybe get action. Like, and I think people seem to forget that whole idea is just because I go on a date with you doesn't mean I'm going to sleep with you.
Yeah.
And I think because a lot of us are just like, yeah, whatever, I'll fuck. That's cool. Now a lot of people have in their mind, if they're going on a date, they're automatically going to get something.
Yeah.
When that's not at all the case. The number of dates I've gone on where I didn't sleep with anybody or hook up with anybody or anything like that. And like people like forget that exists. Yeah. That still took up somebody's time and energy. And the people that have the idea that you can't, not that you can't, but that you shouldn't have to pay for shit is just like a very entitled opinion. And when I have people like that in the strip club, I'm literally like, why the fuck did you walk in here though?
Yeah.
I'm like, I didn't tell you to come here. No one forced you to walk in that door. You made a choice, and then you're going to be disrespectful to me and my coworkers. Like I've had guys like, talk about a really shitty moment I had when I first started dancing. The club I was working at was pretty empty. There was 2 guys and they were on my front row, and I was pretty new at dancing at the time. And I was working at this club that has a 2-story pole. Couldn't do a whole lot of trips, but I knew how to like climb to the top. So that was like impressive, right?
Sure.
And I remember at the end when I was trying to get these guys to tip me and play with me, they were like, oh, you can't even do pole tricks. You want to be a successful stripper, you have to get fake tits, is what they told me. And they berated the fuck out of me as I'm sitting there at my most vulnerable, buck naked on a wide open fucking stage.
Yeah. And
I got off stage and I fucking sobbed. That is one of 2 times that I've ever had a man make me cry in a strip club. And I remember all the girls were like, what the fuck? I was like, those guys just like berated me on stage. Like, absolutely. And it's like, why do you come here just to belittle us? Yeah. They told me if I was going to be a successful stripper that I had to have fake tits and that I couldn't do pole tricks and all this kind of shit. And it just like, I remember my friend who's a pole instructor and also a dancer. She's like, I walked in and you were at the top of the pole. So what do they mean you can't do pole tricks? And I was like, they weren't even paying attention to me half the time.
Yeah.
And it's just like, we deal with that kind of shit and that attitude. And it just like, it baffles me every goddamn time. I'm like, why do you come in here? But it's like, these men want a feeling of like superiority. So they think they can come in and just talk down to me because I'm a stripper, or that like my friends that are strippers, that we're second class citizens.
Yeah.
So it kind of like, those people I just think should stay the fuck home. Like for real, right. Either pay us or get the fuck out. Like, I get it. If I'm not your cup of tea, that's cool. I totally get that. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. And I wish more guys would get this through their skulls, but like, if I'm not your cup of tea, tell me what you like and I'll send someone who is. I don't mind, because even if I'm not getting my bag, I want somebody else to get their fucking bag.
Yeah.
Because that's more important to me than me like fucking me like, well, what the fuck do you mean you don't want to go for a dance with me?
Yeah. Yeah. Like compatibility is like a huge thing, whether it's being in a relationship with someone or if it's you're at the club. Like everyone's got a taste, or like they have a flavor that they want to, I guess, try. But yeah, it is interesting because like, like there's a number of professions that are like, we risk our lives every day, but like you are so like vulnerable in that sense where maybe you're naked, but you're also like, like in a closed room with someone. Like how, like, obviously, like I think it sounds like you've built up enough of a thick skin on the maybe emotional side, but like,
yeah,
like what goes through your mind on like the fight or flight kind of like situations?
I straight up flick dudes in the forehead. I straight up flick dudes in the forehead when they act up.
Oh, really?
Like a dude acts up and I will flick him square in between the eyes and be like, don't fucking do that.
Yeah.
Or like a hand starts to raise and I fucking smack it like hard, and I will scare the shit out of full grown men. Yeah, in the way of like growing my thick skin, like the last time I had someone hurt my feelings was like about a year ago. But the only thing they'll ever get me on is just me having little tits. Like, that's it. Like, that's the only thing that has ever been berated about me is like, oh, you have no tits. And I'm like, bro, you paying for my titty implants or what? No, then shut the fuck up. But what's funny is like that shit hurts me more than the dude trying to touch me. Like, that's what actually ends up at the end of the day really sticking with me and really fucking with me. Whereas the dude that tries to touch my pussy, I'll just fucking smack him. I've straight up hit people, and they like, if my man driver says anything, I'll be like, he tried to touch me. I told him no touching the minute we went into this dance. He tried, so I smacked him.
Yeah.
And I have no problem doing that.
Yeah.
Because at that point, it's like a violation of my space and I haven't really had anything. I think the worst thing I've had happen is I had a kid try to lick the inside of my thigh, which, yeah, he was trying to lick my fucking asshole.
Yikes.
And of course, me being straight edge, I have such, like, I'm paying attention. Like, I'm always on my game.
Yeah.
I like looked back and I was like, get the fuck out of this dance. And he was like, what? And I was like, I felt your tongue on my thigh. And I was like, be lucky I'm not going to break your fucking nose right now. And that your friend is so well behaved. Because I was doing a dance for two guys. And he was like, what? And I was like, get the fuck out before I break your nose. And his friend was just like, the whole time. His friend didn't say shit.
Yeah.
He just sat there and I got out. Or like, I've had guys, like, I've had times where I've accidentally grouped into somebody's nose with my butt or something like that. But I try to always be aware of like where hands are, where faces are, where mouths are.
Sure.
And that was one of the things that I got taught right away when I started dancing by an older dancer. She was like, don't ever take your eyes off them. And so that is one thing I've just like learned, and I've just never done so, which is, I don't want to say is how I've never had anything happen, but it's like, I just am always aware. So I'm able to move fast enough to get out of the way.
Yeah. So you brought up something, and the podcast you were on before didn't really touch on this because maybe they weren't. I don't know the host name, but as far as being straight edge and vegan in an industry where like that is largely not common, I'm kind of curious on that aspect. Like, oh, Marty, are you twitching? Oh yeah, it's fine. He was like having a dream. But being vegan, it's just like, oh, like you don't like to eat meat. Yeah, sure. Like, you can have fries on the menu or whatever. But as far as like, like if you're at a strip club and there's like bar service and table service and things like that, like how have you, I guess, like combated that in the sense of like, like would you still like, I don't know if you would necessarily deliver a drink or like how that, like, has someone ever asked you to do something and you're like, well, I don't drink, so I can't do that?
No. So like, I'll go to the bar and like, if a guy gives me a 20 and is like, oh, go get me this drink. So I'll go get it. Yeah. And then I'll tip the bartender fat is what I'll do. And I'll be like, yeah, you keep this. Yeah. Like if the drink's $10, I'll give the bartender $5 and I'll keep $5 myself. Right. So I don't mind shit like that. It's more just like the amount of times that I have to explain that I don't drink and people think I'm like making it up. Right. Is more what I deal with. Or they're like, oh, you're not drinking tonight. And I was like, no. Like, I don't drink ever. And that's like a really hard concept for a lot of people to grasp. Right. And like the veganism is becoming more commonplace. There's a few girls that I work with that are vegan. So that's becoming more commonplace. But both being straight edge and vegan at the same time is what's the combo of the two. People are like, what? You're vegan? And I'm like, bro, I'm more jacked than you are. Like, I lift myself up on a pole. Yeah. Like, what do you mean? I think there's a lot of doubts that people think because I'm vegan, I can't, like, I'm not going to be in shape and stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm in the best shape I've ever been in my whole life. Yeah. I'm the strongest. I was like, Jessa has me doing fucking conditioning now. She's got me doing pole conditioning because I'm teaching her stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, she's kicking my ass. Yeah. But when it comes to like in the club, like I'll go get drinks and stuff for people. I just tell them I don't drink. Yeah. Like, and I think it's more times than not, it's annoying because it's like guys are so quick to buy me a drink. But if I say I don't drink, I'm like, well, why don't you tip me? They don't want to give me that money. I think that's really weird. So I'm like, you would actually spend more on a drink than you would on tipping me.
Right.
I'm still going to hang out with you and still have a good time. I don't drink. So I've had to use sometimes excuses. Oh, I'm the DD tonight, so this girl can get home.
Oh, I see.
Oh, I'm the DD tonight, so this girl can get home. Or I don't drink while I'm at work. Like just dumb shit like that. Cause sometimes guys just don't get it.
Yeah.
I had one customer specifically who did not grasp the concept I didn't drink. So I had to fake drink with him. And it was so fucking annoying.
Like over the shoulder?
No, I just went up to the service and I was like, for the love of God, please don't fucking put alcohol. Just charge him for the goddamn alcohol. Don't put it in my, like, don't give me alcohol. I don't drink. So he would be getting fucked up and I would just be sitting there like drinking bar lime and soda water with vodka. Because he just like didn't get that I didn't drink.
Yeah.
So then I just had to start playing into this facade that I would be like, oh, you're getting me to drink tonight.
Yeah.
He's the only one I do that with.
Yeah, it is like, shout out to Chris D'Elia, because on his newest comedy special, like, I don't know if he necessarily is like, I'm straight edge, but he's like, yeah, I haven't drinking my whole life. And then he says something to the effect of like some people just can't, like, they don't understand. He's like, what? You don't drink? Nope. Never? This is me doing an impression of him, but it's like, not even once. Beautiful. He's like, that's more than never.
It's like people also ask, they're like, well, how do you do this job then? It's like, how do you go to work?
Right.
Like, you have to go to fucking work sober. Why can't I go to work sober?
Yeah.
Like, why is that such a foreign fucking concept? Or we'll be in a conversation and like having a good time, and at some point they'll be like, oh, do you want to drink? And I'll be like, oh, I don't drink. And they're like, well, how do you have fun? And I was like, were we not having fun like 30 seconds ago?
Right.
Like, bro, come on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, like that's something that I appreciate about you, Nikki, is that you're able to kind of paint things in a very like perspective kind of way, as far as like, well, yeah, like that is right. I don't go to the office and drink. That makes sense. Something else that you said on the past podcast, and I thought this it was interesting too. And again, I'll loosely try to re-say what you said, and then you can kind of add to it. But a lot of people just assume that your romantic relationships are seriously challenged because you're naked in front of all these in front of all these guys, and the fact that you've said like, well, like people are flirting at the office, at their jobs, at the car wash, at whatever, and I thought that was a really good and interesting point on your behalf. But how did you how many times do you ask that, I guess?
All the time. So I do say though, when I'm at work, I'm single. Sure. Because I don't need anybody really knowing about my personal life outside the strip club, because it's just like, it's a safety thing. But like in the way of like anybody I potentially date, I'm always like, hey, I'm a stripper. That isn't going to change. Yeah. Like it or leave it. And like, the people that I have in my life right now are very supportive of what I do and understand. And I like had to be like, just so you know, when I'm at the strip club, you are just a boy I fuck occasionally. Yeah. 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 Cool. And I'm like, as well, like my job is to flirt with people and make them feel wanted. But at the end of the day, it's still my job. Yeah. Like, I don't want to go home with customers. I have no interest in that. Like, that's where my life, I'm not trying to date somebody I meet in the strip club again, but that has to do, not to say that girls who do that, there's anything wrong with. It's just where my interests lie as a person. I'm not going to find that in the strip club ever. Like, and I've had to like explain that to people. I'm like, I'm into hardcore. I'm vegan. I'm straight edge. I'm a dumb fucking feminist. Like, I just like all the ideals that I have don't really fit with 90% of the people I meet in the strip club. For sure. A lot of shit has to go out the fucking window, and I have to like I have to be like, oh God, I forgot I'm in a small town in the middle of fucking Alberta. Right. That's gotta go. I gotta let that slide, or like shit like that, because it's not worth the fight. But so with my relationships, I'm never gonna find a relationship in the strip club. So for me, it's not really a big deal, because I just tell the guys, whoever I'm seeing, I'm like, hey, so this is the deal, like it or leave it. And I just leave it at that. Yeah. And if it's not for them, then it's not for them. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. But I've been so far been very, very lucky to have people that are extremely supportive of what I do. And those are the type of people I want in my life anyways.
Yeah. And that support for like anybody who's doing sex work, I think is really, really important to have people in your court. Cause like you said, there's a lot of battles on the normal day-to-day basis when you're working. And also just like, you know, the haters online to kind of, keep them out. But you know, Nikki, we should probably kind of transition to wrapping things up. But you know, the one thing I want to ask, and I'm sure you've gotten hundreds of messages from, you know, girls or anyone who's like kind of interested in like exploring that for themselves. And, you know, I think a thing that you've really shown is like, you're very self-aware of who you are, what makes you happy. You know, and obviously like, it's the same thing for like people who want to like film bands is like, well, are you willing to do these things? Like what goes through your head when these things come up? So what would be like the couple things that you would at least recommend if someone has a little bit of an inkling to, if that's something that they want to explore? I'm sure you're not like out here being like, everyone should be a stripper.
I think almost nobody's prepared to be a stripper or a sex worker, to be honest. Like, I think a lot of, and I'm going to sound like an asshole when I say this, a lot of people that go, oh yeah, I could totally do that. No, you fucking can't. At the end of the day, there is a lot of people that think they can and they cannot. And there might even be dancers or sex workers now who think they can that really only last 6 months or a year. Nothing. It's not that there's anything wrong with that, but like having this as a longevity of a career is not easy. And it's not just like, oh yeah, it's whatever. Like you said, I have to have thick fucking skin, both like physically and mentally, to deal with the bullshit that I'm dealt with. And like, I think the biggest advice I can always give anyone who wants to look at being a dancer is I'm like, go in and pay. Go in as a customer, tip girls, see how it works, buy some dances and ask some girls some questions.
Yeah.
Like, because if you aren't even willing to pay us in the strip club, why do you think men should come in and pay you then?
Right.
Like, and that might make me sound like a dickhead or whatever, but it's just, if you as a woman aren't even willing to pay us when you're in there, why do you think men should come in and pay you? Like, and that it's harsh, but it's the truth, because like it's even with me doing online sex work, I pay for other like sex workers OnlyFans.
Yeah.
And support and tip people and all that kind of shit on there and take out of my income so that I can support other people. When I go to the strip club as a customer, I go with no less than $400 fucking dollars. And I'm paying for shit.
Right.
And that's just in cash. That's not talking about the money I spend on my credit card. Like, I have to like practice what I preach, but my biggest thing is like, go in and spend and ask questions and be respectful of the dancers. Don't get in the way of them spending, like making money, anything. Encourage your friends to fucking spend money. Like, I tell people, if I go to the strip club with them and I'm like, you are not setting foot in the strip club with me unless you have fucking money.
Right.
Or you're willing to pay for shit. I was like, if you're not, don't fucking come with me.
Yeah.
Like, and that's, but it's not, I'm not even going to pretend it's easy. Like, it's sometimes easy to get the jobs, but the overall aspect of it is always like, I would tell everybody to go ask some questions first.
Yeah.
And
like
often,
being in that, you know, environment and like seeing what it's all about. Cause you know, you could be in there and be like, I don't know, like I'm just kind of pulling this out of thin air, but you could be sensitive to like the sensory of like, oh, it's in a dark room and it's all these lights and there's lots to look at. Like there's so many things that you don't know until you're actually in the hot seat, but like allowing yourself to be in that hot seat and to be like, okay, I'm going to take this in. I'm going to be a sponge versus like critiquing every little thing that you don't like.
And the whole, if you want to be a sex worker, your fucking jealousy needs to go out the goddamn window.
Right.
Like that. Any criticism you have of other women, that those shitty attitudes are, in my personal opinion, what makes people fail in this industry. If you're jealous of other sex workers, if you can like not compare yourself, but if you constantly are just like again, with jealousy, like comparing yourself to these other people and being like, well, they're doing this and I'm doing that, and what the fuck, blah, blah. That's what's going to make you fail. Straight up. That negative mental attitude.
Yeah. PMA, as you say.
PMA! Have that until I die.
Yeah. I was going to make a Womb to the Tomb reference again, but because I just love that. So Nikki, the kind of bookend segment that I have here on the show is just a favorite mosh story. And whether that is something you've done, because you've done your fair share of shenanigans. Now is the time before we kind of do our plugs and wrap up.
Fuck. Well, I mean, if you want to talk about the Hands of God set.
that would kind of bring everything full circle for sure.
So that's a funny story. So when Tsunami first started, everyone's like, Jessa brought up to me. She's like, have you heard Tsunami? I was like, fuck no. So she puts it on. I went, okay, this is fucking ass beater shit. Sick. This is hard as fuck. And then I saw a picture of who was in Tsunami. And I went, these bitch ass motherfuckers are who were in Tsunami? Are you kidding me? Because I saw Theo. And I know how fucking nice Theo is. And now knowing Benny as well, and knowing, I think the vocalist name is Joseph. I could be wrong. And like Mike Dirt, who's also in there. Like once I like saw that, I was like, oh, never mind. And so I compared them to Street Soldier on the internet, and I said Tsunami is what Street Soldier is what Tsunami wishes they were. And I fucking cackled. And so I caught wind at LDB that Tsunami was gonna play or something like that, and I was like, oh fuck. And then they started to play Tsunami, and I was like, I called these motherfuckers bitches on the internet. I gotta act up. So I went and ran across the stage, and instead of stage diving, I just started swinging on everybody.
Yeah.
And luckily it was my friend Eric who I swung on first, but everybody was like, what the fuck? And then ran in, of course, stage dove off the other side. I was like, because if I get caught not moshing during this, I'm going to get my ass roasted. Little did I know Steven cut the footage specifically on me. And then I went,
it's a great storytelling aspect for him,
Well, the great part is like I've become really close with Benny, who now drums in Hands of God, and I guess he watched that set with his mom. And I forgot about this. And his mom goes, that girl's not really wearing a shirt. Wasn't it cold in Kentucky? And he goes, I don't know, she might be a stripper or something. And then it turns out I am a stripper from Canada. I was like, great.
Yeah,
sick.
I love that she was like, well, she's probably a stripper.
He was just like, she's probably a stripper or something. And little did he know I am.
Yeah. I had something come to mind. Well, I have been thinking about this over the last little while. But can we do a fuck, marry, kill with 3 separate bands?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
So
yes.
It was just because you brought up Tsunami, but fuck, marry, kill, and it's Tsunami, Sedition, and Face Wreck.
I'd kill Sedition, hands down. I would kill Sedition. I would fuck the shit out of Tsunami and marry Face Wreck.
Yeah, that seems right.
Like, if you want to talk about my personality,
yeah,
that perfectly sums it up. You had to pick 3 bands that I just want to beat everybody's ass to, didn't you?
Yeah, and Face Wreck would probably be the most, stable, life partner, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Just taking you on rollerblade rides and,
holding my hand and then screaming about hardcore together.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, Nikki, this has been a blast. Not only did we have some goofs and gaffs, but, I really hope that this is a way for people to think more openly about people who do sex work, but also people who might be thinking about that to think like very critically, like, is this something that I want to explore? How can people support you and keep up with you on social and other things?
You have a million ways. Instagram, Twitter, OnlyFans. My Instagram handle is IRL Spinelli.
Yeah.
Or if you want to follow my sex worker one, it's _Karamata. And then same handles for twitter.com. And then my OnlyFans is OnlyFans/Karamata. So whatever way you want to support me is cool. I'm a tolerable person, kind of funny on the internet sometimes.
Yeah.
I talk a lot of shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Nikki, this has been a blast. I love you a lot, and I love just your perspective and your ability to kind of educate people who are a little dumber on certain topics. But thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to come on the podcast.
I have nothing but time for you, Spencer. All the time.